2 headless bodies and 1 missing woman marked the official record of the Red Cord killer case in China. Using the same pattern of romantic deception, he claimed 3 lives in just 7 months, and left dozens of other women alive but scarred by near escapes. How did he do it? To find the answer, we return to December 2011, to the place where it all began. Part 1. The Blood-Stained Room. Room 306 had been quiet for nearly an hour before the hotel staff went up the narrow staircase to check. The air inside was dry, heavy, and strangely metallic. A faint streak of crimson trailed from the tiled bathroom toward the bed, as if drawn by an unsteady hand. On the floor, beside the wall, sat a black travel bag, rigid in shape, the zipper slightly split open. The housekeeper hesitated, then pulled it forward. The weight shifted with a dense, unnatural thud. When the zipper slid back, the sight inside froze her in place. The head of a woman, eyes open as if still demanding an answer, mouth fixed in the tension of a final breath. Her hair was matted, clinging to the lining of the bag, the skin along the neck uneven where it had been severed. In the corridor outside, another employee whispered into the desk phone, her voice shaking as she reported the find to the Shantou City Police. Within minutes, investigators in plain clothes arrived, moving quickly past stunned guests who had gathered near the stairwell. Every movement inside the room became deliberate. They photographed the trail of blood, measured its pattern, and noted that the sheets had been stripped away. The bed frame itself was scrubbed in irregular patches, suggesting someone had worked against the clock to erase what had happened here. The bathroom told its own version of the story. Residual splatter along the shower wall marked the point of violence. A damp rag in the sink carried diluted traces of blood, and on the vanity sat an open packet of preserved plums, half-eaten, incongruous among the sterile police tools now filling the space. It would later become a thread linking this killing to a journey that began far from the hotel. Witness statements placed a man in his 30s entering room 306 with the victim less than an hour before the screams were heard. He was seen leaving alone, carrying nothing more than a helmet under his arm. By the time the staff encountered the travel bag, he had already returned once, wheeling in a large suitcase, only to depart again under the pretense of retrieving something from outside. What the officers faced was more than a single act of violence. The precision of the cleanup, the calm re-entry to the scene, and the calculated disposal method pointed to someone who had done this before. This was not the clumsy work of panic, it was a practiced signature. And somewhere in the city, the man with the helmet was still moving freely. Part 2. Threads of the Past. On December 4, 2011, in the riverside district of Yedong, a body was pulled from the shallows beneath the city's main bridge. It was that of a young woman, stripped of clothing and identity alike. Her head was missing, severed cleanly, and with it any hope of an immediate name. The body was catalogued, stored, and filed away among unsolved cases, a grim entry in a growing archive of unanswered violence. 6 months later, in Jiangmen, another report reached local authorities. Huang Fuang, 46, divorced and living alone, had left home after telling her daughter she was traveling to Shantou for a job arranged by a friend she had met online. Her phone went dead that evening. Attempts to trace her contacts revealed one number she had called repeatedly, unregistered, with no fixed identity, active primarily in Shantou. Without a body, the case stood on little more than a gap in a phone log, and the word of a daughter convinced something had gone very wrong. The third incident unfolded just weeks later. Zhang Tin, 30 years old and working at a foot massage parlor in Zhongshan, boarded a long-distance bus after an online acquaintance promised her a better life. Surveillance footage showed her arriving at Shantou Station in mid-afternoon, collecting a small bag of preserved plums along the way. Within half an hour she was on the back of a motorbike, leaving the station with a man in a dark jacket. By late afternoon she was seen on hotel security footage entering room 306 with him. It would be the last verified image of her alive. In isolation, each case seemed distinct. One a mutilated body with no identity, one a sudden disappearance without witnesses, one a vanishing that ended in a hotel room and a travel bag carrying a human head. Different cities, different circumstances, and no confirmed link. Investigators moved each along its own bureaucratic track, unaware that the same presence hovered in the background of all three. That changed inside room 306, when crime scene technicians catalogued every object. Amid the sterile evidence bags and numbered markers, a small plastic wrapper drew attention. It had once contained preserved plums, the label marked by the Zhongshan Municipal Quality Inspection Office. In a scene wiped nearly clean, this package survived untouched. It was an ordinary snack, yet its origin suggested a route, a starting point, and perhaps a way to follow a victim's path back to where the hunter had first found her. Part 3. The Hunter's Profile. The preserved plum wrapper traced the victim's path back to Zhongshan. From there, transport records narrowed the timeline to a single long-distance bus arriving in Shantou at 3 p.m. on the day of the killing. The driver remembered one passenger in particular, a woman matching Zhang Tin's description, and a man waiting for her near the station. Surveillance from nearby shops caught fragments of his movements: a narrow face, short hair, the outline of a motorcycle helmet in his grip. Investigators cross-referenced the footage with guest records from small hotels in the city. Most entries were incomplete or falsified, but one listing from a week earlier used a phone number active both in Shantou and, more often, in Yedong. That number had appeared in the call logs of another missing woman, Huang Fuang. Detectives began to look for a man moving between both cities, without stable employment, yet with enough familiarity to navigate their streets unseen. The search led to a village on Shantou's outskirts. Residents mentioned a man who matched the description: Tang Tuong Phu, 37, born in Guizhou, once employed at a local print shop. He had lost that job 2 years earlier and now ferried passengers for cash. His past carried patterns that investigators found hard to ignore. A marriage in Guizhou ended after his wife left him for a wealthier man. A later relationship with a woman named A Mai collapsed for the same reason. Tang spoke often of betrayal, of women who valued status over loyalty, and of the indignity of being measured in money. To the officers, this history read like a slow rehearsal for violence. His online life was carefully staged. Tang presented himself as a business owner, cultivating attention from women seeking stability or romance. Behind the screen, he lived in a rented room furnished with mismatched chairs and an assortment of women's clothing and jewelry that could not be explained by his current lifestyle. When Tang was finally brought in for questioning, his expression was flat, his movements controlled. The file in front of him contained evidence from Shantou, Jiangmen, and Yedong, threads investigators had now tied into a single line pointing toward him. He agreed to speak, leaning forward as if ready to set the record straight. But when he began to describe his encounters with these women, the detectives realized the case they had built was only part of the story. This was not the first time he had taken someone's life. Part 4. Confessions in the Shadows. Tang Tuong Phu's account began without hesitation, his voice even, as though he were describing routine events. He said Huang Fuang had seemed eager when they met online. She was unemployed and curious about his offer of a position at his company. When she arrived in Shantou, she learned there was no job. Tang recalled her voice rising, the argument quickening. In his version, the decision to kill came in the heat of that exchange. He gripped her throat until her body stopped resisting. Afterward, he worked methodically, separating her remains, discarding them in stages, stripping the scene of any link to her identity. On Zhang Tin, his tone shifted. He claimed she had shown more warmth during their online conversations, initiating the meeting herself after hearing of his supposed business. In the hotel room, Tang said he intended only to take her valuables after sex, to teach her a lesson. When she fought back, shouting for help, he reached for the red cord he often carried. He wound it tightly, watching her movements fade. The same precision followed, cleaning, packing the head separately, preparing to remove the rest later. The preserved plums left in the bathroom, he insisted, were hers. When asked about A Mai, his voice dropped. She had been his girlfriend, another connection that fractured over money. He recalled the last argument, her declaration that she was leaving him, and the sharp surge of anger it provoked. He acted without pause, strangling her before the thought could dissolve. The disposal was more direct. The body, minus the head, was dropped from Yedong's bridge into the river below. It was the first time he had reduced a person to an unidentifiable form. The interrogators noted the consistency in his narrative, an emotional trigger tied to perceived betrayal, followed by swift violence and deliberate erasure. The line between calculated murder and impulsive rage blurred in each account. For Tang, the act seemed to serve both as punishment and as a way to reclaim control. As the hours passed, the scope widened. Tang admitted to targeting multiple women through false promises of love or employment, taking their possessions, and sometimes letting them leave stripped of belongings to prevent pursuit. But with Huang Fuang, Zhang Tin, and A Mai, the end was final. Each death followed the same rhythm: enticement, confrontation, strangulation, and a practiced method of making a body vanish. When the confession tapered off, the room was silent but for the shuffle of papers. Tang leaned back, his expression unreadable. The investigators understood that the file before them, already dense with crime, might still be incomplete. There could be other names, other endings, concealed in the quiet spaces between his words. Part 5. Lessons Written in Blood. Tang Tuong Phu's trial concluded with a verdict that matched the weight of his crimes. The court found him guilty of multiple counts of murder, robbery, and the deliberate destruction of human remains. The sentence was death. It was a decision shaped not only by the brutality of his acts but by their repetition, the cold calculation that linked each killing, and the clear absence of remorse in his testimony. For the families of the victims, the judgment brought a form of justice, but not relief. Huang Fuang's daughter, left without her only parent, spoke of a home reduced to silence. Relatives of Zhang Tin described the difficulty of explaining to younger family members why she would never come back from what they believed was a simple trip for work. Even in Guizhou, Tang's own parents faced the humiliation and grief of knowing their son's final legacy was written in court transcripts and autopsy reports. Investigators closed the case file with the recognition that Tang's pattern was made possible by a modern vulnerability: trust placed in digital connections without the safeguards of face-to-face familiarity. His method thrived on carefully built illusions: the image of a successful businessman, the promise of employment, the suggestion of romantic stability. Each was designed to lower a guard, to make a meeting seem safe until escape was no longer possible. The case serves as a warning with practical weight. When contact begins in the digital world, verification must come before trust. Job offers, romantic proposals, or sudden invitations to travel should be treated with the same caution one would reserve for a locked door in an unfamiliar building. Tang Tuong Phu's execution will close his part in the story. What remains is the responsibility to learn from it, both for law enforcement, in tracing patterns across jurisdictions sooner, and for the public, in resisting the easy comfort of a convincing lie. The blood that marked this case has dried, but the lessons it offers stay sharp, demanding to be remembered. Listeners are invited to reflect on this case, to consider the details, and to share their thoughts. The conversation it sparks may be the first safeguard against another tragedy built on the same fatal trust.